The fluorescent lights of the Sterling Meadows Community Clubhouse cast a sterile, unforgiving glare on the monthly Homeowners Association board meeting. It was a light that bleached all warmth from the room, turning the beige folding chairs and particle board tables into a landscape of institutional malaise. Thomas Harris sat in the third row, a position he'd chosen for its blend of visibility and anonymity. He was a farmer, a man more accustomed to the vast, honest light of dawn than this flickering, artificial substitute. At the head of the room, behind a long table draped in a forest green cloth, sat the board of directors, and, at its center, the source of the room's frigid emotional temperature, was Karen Sullivan. As board president, she ran the meetings with the chilling precision of a surgeon, her every word and gesture calculated for maximum effect. She wore a tailored blazer, the color of dried blood, her blonde hair pulled back into a severe knot that seemed to tolerate no dissent. "Moving on to new business," Karen announced, her voice crisp and devoid of inflection. She consulted a sheaf of papers, her manicured nails tapping a rhythmic, impatient beat on the tabletop. Item 4A, Compliance Review. Lot 7, 412 Elm Street. A collective, subtle shift occurred in the room. Heads turned. Eyes flickered toward Tom. 412. Elm Street was his address. His family had owned the land for 3 generations, long before Sterling Meadows and its covenants, conditions, and restrictions had sprouted around it like a well-manicured fungus. "It has come to the board's attention," Karen continued, her gaze fixed on her papers, a deliberate refusal to make eye contact that was more insulting than a direct stare, that the mailbox post at Lot 7 is non-compliant with Architectural Guideline 11.3, which specifies a distance of 42 inches from the pavement edge. A recent measurement by the Compliance Committee found the post to be situated at 43 1/8 inches. A murmur rippled through the assembled homeowners. 1 1/8 inches. Even for Sterling Meadows. This was a new level of pedantry. The owner of record, Mr. Thomas Harris, was issued a courtesy notice 2 weeks ago and has failed to rectify the violation, Karen stated, finally lifting her eyes to scan the audience, her gaze sweeping past Tom as if he were a piece of furniture. Therefore, the board will now formalize this into a violation, and a fine of $25 will be levied. Mr. Harris, do you have anything to say in your defense? The question was not an invitation. It was a challenge. It was public theater, a demonstration of power. Tom felt 20 pairs of eyes on him, a mixture of pity, morbid curiosity, and the weary resignation of those long accustomed to Karen's reign. He rose slowly, his large frame feeling clumsy and out of place in the cramped room. He was a man of the earth, his hands calloused from work, his face weathered by the sun. Here, under these lights, he felt like a specimen under glass. "Karen," he began, his voice low and steady, a stark contrast to her sharp cadence. "You and I both know that Post hasn't moved in 30 years. It was there when your developer built this whole neighborhood. The governing documents make no exception for historical non-compliance." "Mr. Harris," she replied, "the formal address, a deliberate distancing mechanism. The rule is the rule. It ensures uniformity and protects property values. Are you stating that you will refuse to comply?" Tom looked at her, truly looked at her, past the armor of the HOA presidency. He saw the deep, unhealed grief that had hollowed out her eyes 2 years ago when her son, Danny, had died. He saw how that grief had curdled into something else, a need for control, for order, for a world where rules, no matter how trivial, were absolute. Because the real world, the one that took an 18-year-old boy in a tragic accident, had no rules. He understood her pain, but he could not abide the cruelty it had birthed. "No," Tom said, his voice calm, betraying none of the cold anger coiling in his gut. "I'll move the post." He sat down. The tension in the room dissipated, replaced by a collective, unspoken sigh of relief. The show was over. Tom had acquiesced. Karen had asserted her dominance. The gears of the Sterling Meadows HOA could grind on. But as Karen moved to the next agenda item, a cold weight settled behind Tom's sternum, the kind that comes not from fear, but from the sudden, clear recognition of an enemy's plan. This wasn't about a mailbox. This was a declaration. It was the first move in a war he hadn't known she was ready to wage. The foreclosure notice lay on the oak kitchen table, like a death certificate. The paper was thick, official, its dense paragraphs of legal text a testament to the inescapable reality of their situation. A dry spell in the spring, followed by a surge in fuel costs, had squeezed their margins to nothing. They were 2 months behind on the loan, and the bank's patience had officially run out. 30 days. Tom, Sarah, his wife, said softly, her hand resting on his. Her touch was his anchor in the storm that had been brewing for months. The bank gives us 30 days to remit the full past due amount, or they initiate proceedings. Tom stared at the numbers. They seemed to mock him. A cold, black and white summary of a lifetime of work hanging by a thread. The farm wasn't just land. It was his father's sweat, his grandfather's foresight, the soil that held the story of his family. Losing it would be like losing a part of himself. "The hay contract," he said, his voice a low rumble. "That's everything. $8,000. It covers the arrears and gives us enough to get through winter." The contract was their lifeline. A single, massive order from a new equestrian center. Payment on completion of delivery. The delivery date was November 16th. Today was October 15th. The timeline was unforgiving. Sarah traced the edge of the foreclosure notice. That meeting tonight. 1.1 inches. It's not just petty, Tom. It's malicious. It's like she's testing you, poking you to see how you'll react. "It's Karen being Karen," Tom said, though the words felt hollow. The public humiliation over the mailbox was a message, and he'd received it loud and clear. For 2 years, ever since Danny's accident, Karen Sullivan had made farmers in the county her personal project. She'd lobbied the county for stricter regulations on agricultural noise, runoff, and equipment on public roads. But her focus had always been general. Now, it was becoming intensely personal. "She blames us," Sarah whispered, giving voice to the thought that had haunted their community since the accident. "Not you, specifically, but our way of life. The machines, the risks. It's easier for her to fight an industry than to face the randomness of what happened." Tom ran a hand over his face. The memory of the accident was a permanent scar. A tractor rollover on a neighboring farm. Danny Sullivan, an agricultural engineering student home from college, had been there helping his friend. Pete. Danny had been killed. Tom hadn't been involved, hadn't even been there. But a deep, unspoken sense of shared responsibility permeated the local farming community. They were all custodians of a dangerous profession. A nagging guilt, small but persistent, pricked at him. 2 weeks before the accident, Danny had come by his barn, looking for a part for a prototype safety system he was designing. A hydraulic valve. Tom had sold him an old one from his surplus stock. He'd told the kid to have it checked out properly. He hadn't thought of it again until he'd heard the news. The official report never mentioned the valve, blaming the accident on operator error and the steep grade of the terrain. But the memory lingered, a quiet, unsettling question mark in the back of his mind. This hay delivery has to go off without a hitch, Tom said, pushing the thought away. I'll start staging the bales by the barn tomorrow. It'll take a few weeks to get everything prepped and ready for the big day. Just be careful, Sarah warned. Don't give her any ammunition. You know she's watching. Tom nodded, his gaze falling on the foreclosure notice again. He wouldn't just be careful. He would be perfect. There was too much at stake to be anything less. The legacy of 3 generations was resting on his shoulders, and he would not let it fall. Not for a bank. And certainly not for Karen Sullivan and her war on an inch of misplaced dirt. The mail carrier's truck whined to a stop a week later, its familiar sound a normal part of the rural afternoon rhythm. But what the carrier left in the box was anything but normal. Tucked among the bills and junk mail was a small green card, the kind that signals the arrival of something important and usually unwelcome. A certified letter. Tom walked back to the house, the card feeling heavy in his hand. Sarah met him at the door, her eyes immediately falling on the slip. What is it? Don't know yet. I have to sign for it at the post office. The 20-minute drive into town was a silent, anxious journey. At the post office, the clerk retrieved a crisp, business-sized envelope. The return address was that of the Sterling Meadows Management Company, the third-party firm that handled the HOA's day-to-day administrative tasks. Back in his truck, Tom slit the envelope open with a calloused thumb. Inside, printed on heavy bond paper with the management company's letterhead crisp and official, was a formal violation notice. Sarah read it over his shoulder, her breath catching. Violation of covenants, obstruction of easement, CC&R, Fargo 8.4.2 property, 412, Elm Street, Lot 7. Dear Mr. Harris, this letter serves as a formal notice of a violation of the covenants, conditions, and restrictions, CC&Rs, for the Sterling Meadows community. An inspection conducted on October 23rd found that large quantities of agricultural material, hay bales, and equipment have been placed within the designated easement running along the northern border of your property. As per CC&R, Bor 8.4.2, no structure, planting, or other material shall be placed or permitted to remain, which may damage or interfere with the installation and maintenance of utilities, or which may change the direction of flow of drainage channels in the easements, or which may obstruct or retard the flow of water through drainage channels in the easements. You are hereby directed to remove all obstructions from the easement area within 14 days of the date of this notice. Failure to comply will result in a fine of $100, with further fines accruing for each week the violation remains uncorrected. This matter has been flagged by the Board of Directors as a priority safety issue. Tom's hands tightened on the paper, the northern edge of his property. He had been staging the hay there for his big delivery, just as he had for the past 30 years. It was the only level, accessible spot near the barn, suitable for loading a massive flatbed truck. A priority safety issue, he said, the words tasting like ash. It's a stack of hay on my own property. Sarah pointed to the citation. Fargo 8.4.2. That's oddly specific. I thought that section was about fences and drainage ditches. The seed of a thought, a small kernel of doubt about the violation's legitimacy, was planted. Tom stared at the date on the notice. October 23rd. The compliance deadline was November 6th. The fines would start just 10 days before his delivery. He looked at the calendar on his phone. It wasn't a coincidence. It was an appointment. This was a calculated, targeted attack, designed to disrupt the single most important financial event of his year. The mailbox had been a warning shot. This was the opening salvo of the real battle. The voice on the other end of the line was professionally pleasant, but unyielding. I understand your frustration, Mr. Harris, but the violation was properly documented and reviewed by the board. Tom was speaking with a portfolio manager from the HOA's management company, a young man named Kevin, whose tone suggested he spent his days navigating a minefield of homeowner complaints. Kevin, this is my annual harvest preparation, Tom explained, trying to keep the desperation from his voice. It's temporary. The hay will be gone on November 16th. It's not a permanent structure. It's not obstructing any utility access or drainage. There was a pause. The sound of keyboard clicks. I see the notes here. Sir, the board president has flagged this as a priority safety issue, citing potential obstruction for emergency vehicles and impact on the community's scenic view. Scenic view. Since when is that part of Fairway 8.4.2, and there's no emergency access lane there? That's my private property. The area is designated as a common easement in the community's governing documents. Sir, Kevin replied, his voice taking on a rehearsed, defensive quality. As for the specifics of the discussion, I'm afraid I can't comment on that. Then, I'd like a copy of the board meeting minutes where this was discussed, Tom said, his patience fraying. I'm a homeowner in good standing. I have a right to that information. Of course, Mr. Harris. I can email you the minutes from the last executive session. Please allow 1 business day for processing. The email arrived the next afternoon. Tom and Sarah opened the attached PDF together. Scrolling down to the new business section, there, under a heading about Tom's property, was a solid black rectangle, a redaction. Below it, a single sentence was visible: motion passes to issue a formal violation notice to Lot 7. What is this? Sarah asked, pointing at the black box. Why would they black it out? A small footnote at the bottom of the page provided the official explanation. Portions redacted, pursuant to state law, protecting attorney-client privileged communications. Attorney-client privilege? Tom scoffed. They're talking about my hay bales. This is intimidation. Plain and simple. They're trying to make it look like they have some secret legal justification that I'm not allowed to see. He felt a rising sense of being trapped in a bureaucratic nightmare, a labyrinth of rules and procedures designed by Karen to slowly suffocate him. Every official channel he tried led to a dead end, a polite refusal, a wall of procedure. He was fighting an enemy who had written the rules of engagement and was now using them as a weapon. That evening, as a cold, autumn rain began to fall, Tom felt a deep sense of despair. The foreclosure notice was a ticking clock, and Karen's violation was a pair of shackles, preventing him from doing the one thing that could save his family's legacy. He felt powerless, outmaneuvered. He needed help. He needed someone who understood the system better than he did, someone who knew how to fight back not with anger, but with knowledge. His thoughts turned to his neighbor, 2 houses down, Arthur Vance, a retired county clerk who had a notoriously low opinion of Karen Sullivan and the very concept of an HOA. Arthur knew where the bodies were buried because, for 40 years, he had been the one signing the burial permits. Arthur Vance's garage was a sanctuary of meticulous order. Tools hung on a pegboard in perfect silhouette. Jars of screws and bolts were arranged by size and type, and the air smelled of sawdust and old paper. Arthur, a man in his late 70s with eyes that missed nothing, listened to Tom's story, nodding slowly as he wiped down a wood lathe with an oily rag. An HOA is a corporation, Tom, not a kingdom, Arthur said when Tom had finished, his voice a gravelly baritone. Karen likes to forget that. She thinks the CC&Rs are scripture, but they're just a contract, and, like any contract, it's only as strong as the documents that support it. He set the rag down and led Tom into his small, book-lined study. The management company sent you a redacted document claiming attorney-client privilege. That's a bluff. They're hiding something. And my guess is they're hiding it because it's weak. But let's start at the beginning. The very beginning. Arthur pulled a heavy, leather-bound atlas from a shelf. It was a plat book of the county from 50 years ago. Every HOA, every development, starts with a plat map filed with the county. It's the foundational document. It defines every lot, every road, every easement. The HOA's own maps and rules can't contradict what's on file with the Recorder of Deeds. If they do, the county record wins. Every time. A flicker of hope ignited in Tom's chest. So what do we do? You need to find the original deed and survey for your property. The one from before Sterling Meadows existed. It should be with your family's papers. See what it says about that strip of land. Then, we get a professional surveyor to stake out the exact lines based on the official county records, not the HOA's pretty little community map. That night, Tom ventured into the dusty, cold attic, a place filled with forgotten treasures and the ghosts of his family's past. In a heavy cedar chest under a pile of his grandmother's quilts, he found a long, canvas tube, brittle with age. Inside, rolled tight, were the original survey and deed to the Harris farm, dated 1958. He and Sarah carefully unrolled the yellowed documents on the kitchen table. The surveyor's lines were drawn in faded blue ink, the descriptions written in elegant, looping cursive. And there it was, along the northern edge of the property, a notation that made Tom's heart beat faster. Herein is granted a 10-foot utility easement for the installation and maintenance of county water and sewer mains. Utility easement, Sarah read aloud, her voice filled with quiet excitement. It says nothing about views, nothing about emergency access. Tom pulled up the Sterling Meadows community map on his laptop, the one included in the HOA's welcome packet. He zoomed in on his lot. The same 10-foot strip of land was clearly marked, but the label was different. In crisp, modern font, it read, Scenic Corridor, Emergency Access Easement. She just made it up, Tom said, a slow, incredulous smile spreading across his face. Or the developer made it up, and she's running with it. It's not legally recorded. It's just a label on a map. The next morning, he hired a surveyor, a man Arthur had recommended. 2 days later, the surveyor's truck was parked on the street, and a man was driving wooden stakes with bright orange ribbons into the ground along Tom's property line. The results came back in a formal report that afternoon, confirming what the old deed had suggested. The surveyor's report was Tom's silver bullet. It was a factual, legally binding document that cut through the HOA's bureaucratic fog. The so-called scenic corridor was a fiction. The easement was for utilities, and his neatly stacked hay bales were interfering with absolutely nothing. He and Sarah spent the evening drafting a polite, formal, and irrefutable letter to the board of directors, attaching a copy of the old deed and the new surveyor's report. He sent it via certified mail. It felt like a checkmate. The board's response was not what Tom had expected. He had anticipated a grudging letter of retraction, a quiet dismissal of the violation. Instead, he received silence. For 3 days, there was no official reply. But Karen was not idle. Her retaliation, when it came, was swift, cruel, and aimed not at him, but at the heart of his support system. A new violation notice appeared, this time taped to the front door of Arthur and Eleanor Vance. Eleanor, a kind woman in her 80s who lived on a fixed income, was cited for a violation of Architectural Guideline 14.7. All decorative lawn ornaments must be maintained in good repair. The offending object a small, ceramic bird bath with a hairline crack near the base. The notice demanded its immediate removal or repair, threatening a $50 fine. Eleanor was devastated. The birdbath had been a gift from her late sister. Arthur was incandescent with rage. "This is witness intimidation," he fumed, standing in Tom's kitchen, the notice trembling in his hand. "She's punishing us for helping you. It's a message to the entire neighborhood: stand with Tom Harris. And you're next." The second blow landed the following afternoon, in the form of an email to Tom from the management company. "Dear Mr. Harris, this email is to convey an informal, pre-hearing resolution offer from the board president regarding the outstanding violations at Lot 7 and Lot 9. Vance, President Sullivan is prepared to recommend the following to the board. The violation against Lot 9 will be immediately dismissed with prejudice. The fines against your property. Lot 7 will be reduced to a one-time administrative fee of $50. This offer is contingent upon your withdrawal of the recent survey documentation and your full, immediate compliance with clearing the easement area." It was a devil's bargain. Karen was offering him an easy way out, a chance to save his friends from her vindictive wrath. For the low price of his principles, all he had to do was surrender, admit she was right when he knew she was wrong, and allow her to solidify her control over the community. The choice presented a secondary moral twist that tormented him. Protecting himself meant leaving Eleanor vulnerable. Protecting Eleanor meant sacrificing the truth and accepting a false accusation, which would only empower Karen further. He walked down to the Vances' home that evening, the weight of the decision heavy on his shoulders. He found Eleanor in her garden, gently touching the cracked birdbath. "I'm so sorry, Eleanor," he began. "This is my fault. I'll take her offer. I'll pay the fine. We'll get this sorted out for you." Eleanor turned to him, her eyes clear and resolute. "Thomas Harris, you will do no such thing," she said, her voice surprisingly firm. "My sister gave me this birdbath to bring a little joy to the yard, not to be used as a bargaining chip by a bully. You are fighting for what's right. That's all that matters. Don't you dare let her win because of my silly birdbath." He looked from Eleanor's determined face to Arthur, who stood on the porch, nodding his agreement. In that moment, Tom's resolve hardened into steel. Karen had miscalculated. She thought targeting his friends would make him weak. Instead, it had made him stronger. He was no longer just fighting for his farm. He was fighting for Eleanor, for Arthur, for every homeowner who lived in fear of a petty tyrant in a blazer. He went home and typed out a short, simple reply to the management company offer declined. "I will see the board at the hearing." The ticking clock was now set for the final showdown. The Sterling Meadows Community Clubhouse, the site of Tom's initial humiliation, was now a courtroom. The long table at the front was the judge's bench, where Karen Sullivan sat at the center, flanked by the other 4 board members. A podium for homeowners had been placed 10 feet away, and next to it, on a small stand, sat a digital kitchen timer. Its green numbers glowed WO5, WO0. The room was packed. Word of the confrontation had spread, and residents had turned out in numbers not seen since the last vote on raising annual dues. Arthur and Eleanor Vance sat in the front row, a silent show of solidarity. "The board will now hear the matter of violation FET 23 concerning Lot 7, 4112 Elm Street," Karen announced, her voice resonating with authority. "The association's position will be presented first, followed by a 5-minute response from the homeowner. We will maintain a strict schedule." Karen rose and walked to a projector screen. Her presentation was flawless, a masterclass in corporate warfare. She displayed a series of high-resolution, time-stamped photographs of Tom's hay bales. "As you can see from Exhibits A through C," she said, her tone calm and even. The obstruction in the designated scenic and emergency access easement remained for a period of several weeks. A clear violation. The board's only concern is the consistent application of our community's safety standards and the preservation of the aesthetic uniformity that protects all of our property values. She spoke of potential fire hazards, of blocked access for first responders, painting a picture of a reckless farmer endangering the entire community. She was poised, professional, and utterly convincing. When she finished, she returned to her seat, a faint, confident smile on her lips. "Mr. Harris, you have 5 minutes." Tom walked to the podium, his heart pounding against his ribs. He placed a thin manila folder on the lectern. He looked at the timer, then at the faces of his neighbors, and finally at the board. "Good evening," he began, his voice steady. He would not argue. He would not plead. He would simply present the facts. The timer started its silent countdown, 4:59, 4:58. "The board is accusing me of obstructing a scenic and emergency access easement. My first piece of evidence addresses the legal definition of this easement." He held up a large, professionally printed map. Exhibit A. This is the official plat map for the Sterling Meadows subdivision, as filed with and certified by the County Recorder of Deeds. He pointed to the strip of land in question. "As you can see, the 10-foot area along my property is legally designated a utility easement for the sole purpose of county access to water and sewer lines. There is no mention of scenic views or emergency access." The timer read 3:00. A low murmur went through the crowd. One of the board members leaned over and whispered to the HOA's attorney, who was seated at the end of the table. "Now, let's address the specific rule I am accused of violating, CC&R Section 8.4.2. Tom projected a slide with the full text of the rule, not just the snippet Karen's notice had included. The notice I received cited the part about material which may obstruct, but it conveniently omitted the full context. The section heading is Easements for Utilities, Drainage, and Fencing. The rule is intended to prevent homeowners from building permanent structures, like sheds or fences, that would physically block access for digging or maintenance. It was never intended to apply to the temporary, seasonal staging of agricultural materials. The timer hit 1:30. The faces on the board members, with the exception of Karen, now showed visible concern. They were looking at each other, then at their attorney, whose expression was growing grim. "Finally," Tom said, his voice dropping slightly, "the question of intent. Why was this specific, misinterpreted rule weaponized against me at this specific time?" He held up a single sheet of paper. Exhibit C. This is a copy of the board's executive session, minutes from October 22nd. The same minutes I was sent. But this copy was obtained through a formal records request filed by a concerned resident. He looked pointedly at Arthur Vance. "This version is unredacted." He placed the document on the overhead projector. The black box from his copy was gone. In its place was a paragraph of text, now visible for all to see. Karen's name was next to the motion. Tom read it aloud, his voice clear and resonant in the suddenly silent room. Motion by K. Sullivan to address Mr. Harris's agricultural operations before his large-scale commercial activities. Scheduled for mid-November. Negatively impact property values and set a precedent for unapproved commercial staging in a residential zone. We need to address this immediately to prevent disruption. The timer beeped. Its 5 minutes expired. Tom looked directly at Karen, whose face was a pale, frozen mask of disbelief. Her composure had finally, irrevocably shattered. "The evidence is clear," Tom concluded, his voice ringing with quiet authority. There is no scenic corridor. The rule was misapplied, and the action was not motivated by safety, but by a premeditated, targeted effort to interfere with my family's legal and essential business. You, the board, have been misled into enforcing a non-existent rule to service a personal vendetta. By doing so, you have put this entire association and the funds of every homeowner in this room at significant legal risk. A profound silence descended upon the clubhouse. It was a heavy, suffocating silence, thick with the weight of Tom's revelations. Every eye in the room was fixed on the board table, where the four other directors were pointedly avoiding looking at Karen Sullivan. They stared at the documents, at their attorney, at the ceiling, anywhere but at the woman who had led them to the edge of a legal cliff. The HOA's attorney, a man named Henderson, leaned in and spoke to the vice president in a low, urgent whisper that was nonetheless audible in the stillness. Liability, bad faith enforcement, breach of fiduciary duty. You need to correct this on the record. Now. The vice president, a mild-mannered accountant named George, cleared his throat. He looked pale. Ahem. The board has reviewed the evidence presented by Mr. Harris. He glanced at the other members, who gave him shaky, desperate nods. It appears there has been a significant misinterpretation of the governing documents. He turned to Tom. Mr. Harris, I would like to entertain a motion. Does a board member wish to make one? A woman on the far end of the table, who ran the social committee, raised her hand as if in a daze. I move to dismiss violation V-1023 against Lot 7 with prejudice, and to rescind all associated fines and notices. Second, another member mumbled. All in favor, George asked. 4 hands shot up instantly. Opposed. He glanced at Karen. She sat rigid, staring straight ahead, her face ashen. She did not vote. Her power had evaporated in the space of 5 minutes. The motion carries, George announced, a wave of relief washing over his features. But it wasn't over. Before George could move to the next item, a hand went up in the audience. It was another homeowner, a retired engineer who had clashed with Karen in the past over architectural reviews. Point of order, Mr. Vice President, he said, standing up. In light of the evidence of premeditation and bad faith enforcement presented here tonight, I move that the board authorize an immediate, independent audit of all fines, violations, and legal expenditures incurred during Ms. Sullivan's presidency, to be conducted by an outside firm. A chorus of second erupted from the audience. Arthur Vance's voice was the loudest among them. George looked at the attorney, who gave a sharp, definitive nod. This was no longer about a single violation. It was about containing a full-blown crisis of governance. A motion has been made and seconded, George said, his voice gaining a bit of strength. All homeowners in favor of an independent audit, please say aye. A deafening AYE filled the room. Opposed. Only one voice, small and defiant, was heard. Nay. It was Karen. A last, futile protest from a queen whose castle was crumbling around her. The motion carries, George declared. He then looked down the table at Karen, his expression now firm. And I believe it would be in the best interest of the association for the board to accept President Sullivan's resignation, effective immediately. Karen Sullivan, the untouchable ruler of Sterling Meadows, stood up slowly. She gathered her papers with trembling hands, her face a blank canvas of shock and humiliation. She did not look at anyone. She walked out of the clubhouse, the door swinging shut behind her, leaving a community to reckon with the wreckage of her reign. Weeks later, A fragile peace had settled over Sterling Meadows. The farm was safe. The hay had been delivered. The bank had been paid. And the foreclosure notice was a bad memory. Tom, at the urging of Arthur and other neighbors, had drafted a new bylaw amendment, overwhelmingly approved at a special meeting. That required all non-routine violation notices to be reviewed by a multi-member compliance committee, ensuring no single board member could ever again weaponize the rules for a personal vendetta. One crisp December afternoon, Tom was mending a fence line when he saw a figure walking toward him from the direction of the Sullivan house. It was Karen. She was no longer wearing the severe blazers and power suits of her presidency. Dressed in a simple sweater and jeans, she looked smaller, diminished. She stopped a few feet from the fence, not meeting his eyes. "I'm selling the house," she said, her voice quiet, "moving closer to my sister." Tom nodded, saying nothing. There was nothing left to say. Karen held out a small cardboard box. "I was cleaning out Danny's room. I found this. I thought you should have it." He took the box. It was light. Inside, nestled in tissue paper, were a few technical manuals, a university sweatshirt, and a slim, black, hardbound journal. "I'm sorry," she whispered, the words sounding foreign and difficult on her tongue. It wasn't an apology for the harassment or the violation. He realized it was for something deeper, something broken inside her that she was only just beginning to understand. She turned and walked away without another word. That evening, by the warmth of the fire, Tom opened the journal. The pages were filled with Danny's neat, precise handwriting, diagrams of hydraulic systems, and complex engineering equations. Tom flipped to the last entry, dated the day before the accident. March 19th. Got the last part I needed today from Mr. Harris down the road. It's an older hydraulic valve, and it feels a little loose, definitely questionable. But Pete's tractor is a death trap, and the rollover is scheduled for tomorrow's test run on the high pasture. There's no time to order a new part. My calculations show the system's redundancies should hold even with a suboptimal valve. The accumulator and pressure relief circuits ought to compensate for any lag or failure. It's a calculated risk. But Pete's a good guy with a family. I have to try. If my system can save him, even with a faulty part, then I'll know the core design is sound. Tom read the entry again, and then a third time. The guilt he had carried, the small, persistent question mark about the valve, suddenly shifted. It wasn't a story of his negligence causing a death. It was a story of a brilliant, brave young man making a conscious choice, taking a calculated risk to save a friend's life. Danny hadn't been a victim of a faulty part, so much as a hero who knew the risks and accepted them. The accident was a tragedy born not of carelessness, but of courage. The truth was more complex, more bittersweet, than the simple narrative of blame he and Karen had both clung to. It provided a foundation not of victory and defeat, but of a shared, devastating loss. He thought of the foundation Karen had mentioned she wanted to start with Danny's inheritance, a plan to fund agricultural safety research. Perhaps now, with this nuanced truth, they could build it from a place of shared understanding. The path to forgiveness was long, but for the first time, Tom could finally see the beginning of the road.